Hi parents, welcome. It's Petra Deeter. I wanted to come on today to talk to you guys because today in the US it is Mother's Day, and I know that Mother's Day is always a harder time. Hi parents, welcome. It's Petra Deeter. It's a harder time for parents. Sorry, there's some audio echoing, so let me just check that. I don't know if you guys can actually hear me properly, if there's the echo still going on, but welcome. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about Mother's Days, but also to highlight. I came back from a conference in Athens, the ICSP Conference, which is the International Council for Shared Parenting Conference. And there was a lot of interesting highlights, so I also wanted to share that with you guys. I wanted to see, could you tell me if you could hear me okay, where you're calling in from? And also, how has it been for you being Mother's Day today, if you are from the US? But yeah, so let's talk about the conference first. And it's in no particular order. I just wanted to share. Hi, Alicia from Florida. Thank you so much. I assume that you can hear me okay. Thank you so much for watching. Okay, so the ICSB conference is organized by the International Council on Shared Parenting. And so the main topic is about shared parenting, in situation of separation, divorce, or parents that have never been married. And so there's a lot of different topics, including parental alienation. And so these are some of my notes from the conference. I mean, there were amazing panels of discussion that going in parallels, and there's a lot of things that was going on. And I try to, you can't attend everything because sometimes there are 3 panels that are going on at the same time in different rooms, and I try to run to different places. But anyways, these are some of my notes in no particular orders. So for example, I attended a talk by Dr. Edward Crook from Canada. And some of the things that he talked about, actually he had 2 different talks. One of them actually is about grandparents alienation, which many of you relate to. So anyway, some of the notes that I took from his talk was, for example, one of the challenges that we face as a community, and for you, for targeted parents face, is that important decisions are being made by unqualified people. And these unqualified people are non-experts in the field, and they have personal biases. And because of that, it creates a huge problem in making decisions that are appropriate for the safety of your children. Hi, Molly. Molly's from Texas. I'm so sorry. It's the 3rd Mother's Day without my children. That's really tough being, yeah, I do realize that it's a lot harder on holidays and on special days like Mother's Day, at special occasions where you are missing out on what should be an important moment, where opportunities for you to create memories and things like that. So I do understand very much what you are going through. Just a second, I apologize. I think I forgot to share this to different places. So give me a moment, and if you guys could please help me share this into other places as well, different groups or on your own Facebook pages and things like that. Let me just see if I can fix this problem. I just realized that. So anyway, yeah. So one of the notes that I took from that is that important decisions are being made by unqualified people who have personal biases. So then it creates a huge problem for children and for parents. Okay, another thing is that he said sometimes it feels like we just beat our heads against the wall, because it seemed like even though we have evidence-based solution, yet for some reason we have trouble pushing these solution or these findings from science and from research into the legal and social application of this. And so I do understand this from both the micro level, which is as parents, you feel like you're banging your head against the wall and not making progress with the relationship with your children or the situation with your ex and with the alienators and things like that. But at the same time, at the macro level, as a community where we try to fight for justice for parents and for children, we sometimes feel like frustrated, like we're not making progress. And I understand this, like I mentioned, both from the macro level as well as the micro level. But at the same time, I do realize that sometimes breakthrough can happen very unexpectedly and in ways that you may not anticipate. You may not realize that it can actually happen in ways that better than you expect. I've seen it in my personal life. I've seen it in other people that I've worked with, and I know this to be true. So I don't want you to give up that hope. I don't want you to feel like you're not making progress, because sometimes it may seem invisible, but really breakthrough can happen. You need to hold on to that hope. It's very important. Alessandra said, every alienated mom who without their children today on Mother's Day, my heart is with you. Yeah, truly, because and I think it's so important for you to remember that you are a mother, no matter what, you are a mother, and no one can take that away from you, ever. No one, regardless of what anybody else saying, regardless of anything that's going on, regardless of how your children behave. Your children need you, your children love you. And no one can take away that love that you have for your children, and that's what defines you, is that your love you have for your children. You are a mother and you are enough. So really celebrate you. Recognize the love that you have for your children and appreciate yourself. Really, it's so important to not give up that recognition. Okay, there's another conversation that I saw was, okay, let me just, it's like I said, my notes is not in any particular order. Another talk that I attended at the ICSP conference was actually by attorney Brian Ledmer. Now, if you guys have been following me for a while, you've seen that I've interviewed attorney Brian Ledmer a few times, and he's amazing. He's an attorney that specializes in high conflict situation, parental alienation, that kind of things in Canada. And he has been such an amazing champion in this cause, in trying to find a way to protect parents and children. And what I appreciate a lot about Brian is that he understands that not every parent can afford to bring in expert witness. Not every parent can afford to, have this drawn out situation. And he understands the science. He understands the framework very well. But at the same time, he has always advocated for a softer approach. And so he has always figured out ways of how do we get to a solution without going just full on completely aggressive. So, so for example, one of the big things that he talked about in his talk that I took note from is that sometimes and he recognized that judges are the gatekeeper for the opinion evidence, like when you bring in expert witness and things like that. But at the same time, the court, the court has, even when you don't have the opportunity to bring in experts, so, the factual inquiry is different from the legal and the scientific discovery, obviously. So how do we get the court, and it's important to bring in and request that the court take a judiciary notice. And so this is by saying, okay, we're not bringing in expert witness on, for example, parental alienation or on children false memory or things like that. But instead, you bring in solid science that already been out there. And for example, he brought up there's a thing called the Guidelines on Memory and Law, for example, that from the British Psychological Society Research Board that was published in 2008. So these are like really solid fundamental information that's already out there. And what you do is, instead of trying to bring in expert witness, you request that the court take judiciary notice. And that require the court to acknowledge that parental alienation is real, and children memory can be falsified, distorted, and implanted, and things like that. And with that, you are able to bring the court into recognition of the problem that you are facing. So that's something that he was talking about, and I thought that was very interesting. If you look up in Victim to Hero Facebook page and go into the videos tab, you will see the past interview that we've done with Brian Ludmer, and you will see that there's multiple places where he talks about different approaches where you can actually have making progress in your legal battle without having to go full on aggressive and bring in legal experts and fighting tooth and nail, and be able to get to a sort of like a common ground without having to put in a lot of resources that you can't afford. So I thought that was really important. Okay, Dr. Edward Crook also had a talk about grandparent alienation, and some of the findings. So these are the early stages of his research. He hadn't completed the research fully, but some of the things are not surprising to us, right? There's a sense of learned helplessness because grandparents are not able to go out there and fight for their children, because legally there's very limited grandparent rights in only very few jurisdictions. So there's this sense of helplessness, that they can't do anything about it, and this wound is generational, because grandparents getting alienated from their grandchildren usually because their relationship with their own children has broken down, or because their children have been alienated from the grandchildren. So there's that intergenerational situation that's going on. So like none of this is surprising, and the traumatic impact on grandparents is very painful, and yet they're not able to speak about it. So like I said, this is definitely not something new. It's expected, but anyway, so I thought that was an important study. There's another study that came from Germany, and I thought that was very interesting. Was that this study did a study on the impact on the quality of life, so life satisfaction and physical health and mental health. So three different things, looking at life satisfaction, physical health, and mental health of adults who grew up in different form of childhood. So the normal childhood where parents are together and etc., and then children of divorce, normal divorce, and then alienated children. So there are three different groups that he studied and try to compare them. Normal childhood, children with divorce, and alienated children, and looking at three factors: life satisfaction, physical health, and mental health. And by all measure, he found that alienated children suffer the most, even compared to children of divorce, and definitely compared to children of normal childhood. Their life satisfaction, their physical health, and mental health have been significantly impacted by the fact that they have been alienated. So this is actually the first study ever in Germany. So this is all the adult children in Germany. And so one of the discussion I thought was really interesting is that he pointed out that what we are doing as a society is that parents going through divorce, and especially alienation, it's a psychological problem. It's an emotional situation. And yet we are trying to apply a judicially solution to an emotional problem, and this is why it hasn't been working. Is that, you know, when parents going through parental alienation is a psychological problem, and yet we wanted to use judicial solution, which is the court system, a legal solution in order to solve a psychological problem. So perhaps if we can change the way that we think and look at this problem and recognize that this is a psychological problem, how do we fix that using psychological and emotional solution as opposed to just using the judicial solution? So I thought that's a good question that was raised. And let me know what you guys think. I do see comment from Alicia. I see comment sorry, I missed a bunch of comments. Actually, feel free to just leave your comment and question. I will try to go through it. I do see, for example, Molly said, I'm challenging orders in the Texas Supreme Court. I wish more people could. We need laws that set precedent, and we their parents with standing that can make the quickest direct impact on the macro level. I totally agree, Molly. I also gave a talk at the ICSP conference where I did talk about, if we're looking at the system, right, at least in the US, you have three different things, right? You have the lawmaker, you know, which are the politicians and things like that create the law. And then you have the people that interpret the law. So for example, Department of Justice and things like that. And then you have the people that execute the law. So the court, the police, the sheriff, and things like that. There are opportunities for us to make changes at all of those three different branches of the government, should I say, right? So on one particular branch, which is the execute branch, which is, you know, where the law is being applied. This is where Molly was talking about challenging the orders and set precedents. Is exactly that, is that if we can go in and create case law, and we do have a lot of case law, by the way, but for anything whatsoever, if we can create different case laws for different scenario and situation in all jurisdiction, that also helps. Like, we should go and try to change the law. Yes, you should try to change the way that the law is being interpreted, but also when the law is being applied, if we can also change the precedent, then we can also help in many ways. So it doesn't have to be changing the law itself, but, you know, in how it's being seen and how it's being applied. So it's important. Alicia said, I would love to hear if there's any progress of the DSM-5 and your opinion about the bias study just being put out by the UN. The UN ignored the scientific research by the psychology community in favor of lawyers' misinformation. This is so disappointing for families globally. Alicia, I think there was an update on the progress regarding the DSM-5 by Dr. William Burnett. So I will follow up with that and come back another time. Let me get some update on that, and then I'll come back and talk to you guys about that. And then in terms of the study by the UN, I'm not sure if I've seen something that was going on with the UN, but that was a few months back. I'm not sure if you're talking about something like even newer than that. If you don't mind, please give me the link or the information. Let me double check to make sure. But I do know the UN has been influenced by a lot of misinformation, and it's tragic. It's really, really sad. And I think there was a point where the UN was calling out for people to submit opinions, but I think a lot of those opinions were being ignored. And this is a problem, and it's back to the comment that I mentioned earlier, is that important decisions are being made by unqualified people, non-expert, with biases, personal biases, and they're being influenced by misinformation and disinformation, unfortunately. And by the way, don't let that deter you from keeping your hopes and from staying in your battles to fight for your children. Because as a society, we have all gone through a lot of injustices. And if you're looking at the history, you've seen that this is not new. As a human race, as a civilization, as a society, we've gone through a lot of misinformation, a lot of mistake, a lot of things that are just completely outrageous. But over time, the truth always prevailed. So, for example, if you look back at the tobacco industry, there was a point where the tobacco industry denied that smoking cigarettes can cause lung cancer. And they did everything they could. They went out of their way to suppress science, to suppress people that stood for the truth. And there was research, there's science, and the denial that they spread misinformation. They had a say in all the decision maker and was able to influence a lot of things. And as a result, we ended up with a society where we thought it was cool to smoke cigarette. It was fun to smoke cigarette. It was harmless to smoke cigarette. And as a society, we promoted the tobacco industry, who benefited financially really vastly from promoting misinformation. But eventually, as you see, we as a society finally recognize that smoking cigarette is harmful for your lung. And so I look at this, and this isn't just one example. I mean, like, you can see many other examples in our society. There was a time where our society believed that the earth is flat, and if you come too close to the edge, you might fall off, right? And if you look back, like, for example, Galileo, there was a point that he was punished by very powerful people in the society for talking about science and speaking the truth and talking about gravity and acceleration and things like that. There's all these different things that, if you look at the history, this is not new. So make sure you stay on the right side of the history and don't give up hope. And if you look at the history and you know that the truth will prevail, then don't give up hope, really. So there's that. Okay, let me check some more question, maybe. Policy, the courts need to pay for the experts. They are taking fundamental rights without due process. It's a civil given issue. Yeah, the issue about paying is a very big problem too when it comes to parents trying to fight for their children. And one of the problem with this whole situation is that you have an abuse that's going on. Like when you're talking about parental alienation, you have a child abuse situation going on, right? So you have an abuser and you have the victim that is a child, but yet still really this is a criminal offense. Child abuse is a criminal offense. Like, so for example, if you see a situation where a child has been molested, that's a criminal offense. It doesn't go into a civil court, it go into a criminal court. And in the criminal court, it's the government versus going against the criminal, and the victim, which is the child, is being protected, and the government's defending the right of the victim and going after the criminal, right? So in parental alienation, it should be the same. It's a child abuse situation, but yet it's being sorted out in civil court through the custody battle. Now, in civil court, it's not the government versus the criminal. The civil court system looking at a case as a dispute between two parties. That's between you guys. It's personal, and my job is just standing here and trying to be the referee and trying to see who I believe more, and I will rule according to who is best at arguing the case. And that's a situation, that's a problem, is that the court overlook and the system overlook that this is a child abuse situation, and we solve this in the civil court as if it's a dispute between two parties. In the meanwhile, we have a child here that is a victim of abuse, not to mention the alienated parents who are also victims of abuse, and yet we have an abuser here standing free from being held accountable for their abusive actions. And then at the same time, the court look at this as personal dispute and then go, oh, we're just going to sit here and watch and see which of you guys is more convincing. Now, you have this abusive party. Obviously, they're going to feel like there's the power imbalance. So obviously, they're going to see this party seem a little bit more power, more control, and this victim, while being abused, obviously they're not going to be able to present themselves as clearly and as confidently as the abuser. And so now this is why the system make the mistake so many times, and that's a very big problem. Okay, let me continue. Burnett says, so much truth being told here, Petra. Depending on how things may improve, is all in the lap of the gods. Thank you. I do. Oh, Alicia, thank you so much for that link to the UN. By the way, that link is not an official, as far as I know, that's not an official, UN website. So I would say be careful with that, but I will look into that. Okay, thank you for sharing that. I saw someone posted some slanderous. This is a problem. Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and usually I don't really pay attention to the people that spread misinformation and disinformation, and I don't let that affect me, because I realize that when you try to speak the truth, there will always be people that going out there trying to shut you down. But my focus have to be on you. How do I provide support for you? What can we do to protect the children and parents? And I try my best to not pay attention on the abusive, slanderous, and misinformation out there. But thank you for the link. I may check it out, I may not. Okay, I'm going to continue with my note from the ICSP conference. There's not a lot of notes. I try to run around, and I did not keep a lot of notes. One of the things that was presented was by Dr. Edward Bartlett on false allegations. So they commissioned the organization called DAVIA. DAVIA is an organization that's working for victims of domestic violence and abuse policies, and they focus on science-based and family affirming, and they are sexually inclusive, meaning they don't they're not gender biased, so they're not trying to going against father or mothers or husband or wife. Okay, and so and the organization consists of 84 different organizations from 32 countries. So Davia commissioned studies on false allegation in 3 different countries because they wanted to try to get numbers on the level, how widespread it is, the false allegation, and if there are differences, or no, not 3 countries. I think they did a study on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 countries actually. So that's a very big. They commissioned a very big study on 8 different countries, and what they found is that that false allegation happened in all of those countries. I mean, obviously, this is not a surprise. We know that false allegation is widespread in many countries. These are not all English-speaking countries. India, Australia, Argentina, Poland, Spain, United States, Canada, United Kingdoms. So there were all these different countries, and they found that false allegation happened in all countries, and let's see. It seems that, let me see, I'm trying to understand what my notes and the data that they show. Okay, countries that have the highest number of false allegations is India, Australia, and United States. Okay, countries that have the least number of false allegations are Poland, Spain, and United Kingdom. So this is out of the 8 countries that they commissioned the studies in. And another thing that they found is that majority of the perpetrators are actually female, and male are more often the victims of false allegation. They also found that in 6 out of the 8 countries that they did the study, about 1/3 of the false allegations were made as a part of a custody dispute. So in custody dispute, people will often create false allegation to gain the upper hand, and that is not surprising to us. But now we actually have the number. So they found, for example, in the United Kingdom, there's 6.7 million. I'm not sure. I need to double check my note, but there are actual numbers that they could get to show you the number of false allegation. Okay, Alicia said, do you have the link to this study? I will talk to Dr. Ballett and find out where they published the study. The Davia does have a website, so it's called end2dv.org. So end to domestic violence, so endtodv.org, and Davia is /Davia, so DAVIA. But I will look for, actually they do have a press release that share the finding of the studies. So if you go to end2dv.org, you probably will find information on the study. Okay. Another talk, and I think I forgot to put the name down who presented the talk, so I'm not sure. But this talk is about the neuropsychological impact of parental conflicts on the children. And some of the key findings from this, unfortunately, is talking about how parental conflict has impact on the children, and it created changes in the children, not just in the functions. That means that not just the children behave differently, but it actually changes the structure of the brain in the children's brain. And so when you talk about high conflict, they define it as the frequency. So it has to be frequent, it has to be intense, and it has to be poorly resolved. So that's define high conflict. There has to be aggression, maybe sometimes even non-verbal, silent treatment, things like that. But frequent, intense, and poorly resolved. So they look at the impact of this high conflict, parental conflict, on children, and they found that it changes the children's brain structure, and it also have changed to the DNA receptors. That means that it potentially can also change the gene and create impact into the future generation. And this, I guess, lead to it's also aligned with what we do find, that parental alienation is an intergenerational situation. Okay, so that's another note that I have. Okay, and then small note, let's see. Okay, I listened to a talk by a judge in Portuguese, a Portugal judge. His name is Pedro Figueiredo, and he was talking about looking at the conflict, like how to resolve cases, custody cases between parents. And he said one of the problem is that we look at these things, this conflict, as if they are out of ordinary. But what we should look at is that these are actually pretty common, and they are natural situations. They are failure of a common life project. A marriage or a relationship is a common life project, and when it fall apart, it's a natural failure. And if we recognize that, and the reason he's arguing this is because this. If we refuse to recognize that that's a natural, normal part of life, then we refuse to acknowledge that failure in a common life project create anxiety, create conflict. And so we refuse to recognize and accommodate for fear, anxiety, and conflict, then we will not be able to account for those problems and be able to solve them properly. So he proposed that for judges to recognize that these are normal, natural part of life. These are failure of a common life project. So parents are going to have anxiety. Parents are going to have conflict. So if we can approach that and anticipate that because they have conflicts, they potentially can lie, they potentially can influence the children in a way that are negative, that they could potentially brainwash the children, so that when you come to these, he proposed a framework where judges should stay active and listen actively and stay neutral and not being biased on one side and focus on the children and set boundary. And then enforcement was a big thing that he talked about, like not allowing parents to violate court orders, for example, enforce the court order and not taking it lightly when a parent violates the court order. Those are important things. So I thought that was really good. And then he talked about early prevention and forcing, recognizing these issues, how to do reverse counseling to help the children. So I thought those were really good in terms of recognizing the problem. And this came from a judge. I always appreciate when a judge recognizes parental alienation, a judge recognizes the struggle that targeted parents go through and the risk for the children that being caught in the middle. So I always appreciate that. Another study that I thought was also very helpful that was presented at the conference was by Dr. Alan Blosky. And what he did is he studied the motivational beliefs behind parental alienation. Now, when I ask you guys, and I do ask sometime, and we can ask you right now, is why do you think alienators do what they do? What is the motivational reasons behind their actions? Why do they do what they do? Because we all see that this is damaging for children, this is abusive, this is causing harm to their children, but yet they're doing these things. And these are people very often you were in love with. These are people that you once hoped to have a beautiful life together, and yet they are doing harm to you now, and they're doing harm to these children. So why are they doing that? I'm curious. I mean, for you personally, for your case personally, why do you think that alienators are doing these things? And when we ask this question, everyone had a lot of answers, and I do want to hear what your thoughts are on your own situation. But so Dr. Blosky went into 40 different evaluation reports from cases that have been proven to be parental alienation cases. Now, these are cases where these parents was proven to be alienators because they have committed more than 10 of the 17 alienating behaviors. Like if you guys are familiar with the 5-factor framework for parental alienation, for detecting, for diagnosing parental alienation, one of the factors is about alienating behaviors. And if you go into the study by Dr. Baker, Amy Baker, she categorized there are 17 main typical alienating tactics or alienating behaviors that alienators will use. And so there have been different cases, and so that he pulled out these 40 different cases where alienators, these parents have been proven to be alienators because they committed more than 10 of the 17 alienating behaviors. So he pulled out the evaluation, custody evaluation report, and he took out their recorded, like from the report, verbatim quotes from these parents, and then he quote them, categorize them. based on his quote and thematic analysis, he found there's 6 different categories. And so the 3 biggest themes that he found, the reason why these alienators committed these acts are the 3 things. 1 is vindictiveness, and 2 is fear of losing the children, and 3 is overprotection. So they, or extreme family issues, so they have their personal reattachment issues in the past and things like that. I do see Bernard said, why do they do it? For perceived revenge without a single thought for the adverse outcome of the children. Yeah, I think we do feel this a lot, is that these are revenge. They try to use the children, they weaponize the children in order to hurt you. So it's out of, and I think that's one of the finding here is he said vindictiveness, right? He feel that these not he found from the finding, based on verbatim quotes that coming from these parents, that yeah, there's vindictiveness. They want revenge. So there's definitely that. I see a comment here about I don't understand your question, Bernard, about the false allegation, but I do understand the bit where you said, why can the authority not see them? Like, why can't the authorities see them and let alone act on them? Yeah, if they cannot recognize a false allegation, then obviously they cannot take action on it. Why can't they see false allegation? This is always a question for me. Like, anytime I see a judge, I always ask them, when you see an allegation of abuse, on children or whatever, what are your way of recognizing if it's true or false? How do you know if it's true or false? And I ask this question a lot because this is a very big thing for me, is try to figure out how can the system do a better job of recognize and like, if you have suggestion, I would love to hear it, because this is a very big problem that I want to solve. I definitely, it's something that I think about a lot. Because this is like the crux of the problem right here, is false allegation. And if you are a target parent, your chances of being a victim of false allegation is very high. You've probably been through it multiple times. I had, child protective agencies turning up at my house like many times. And it's tiring, it's painful, it's hurtful, it's devastating, it's dehumanizing, it's just everything that you could think of, let alone the fear, the anxiety of losing your children, losing everything that is your reputation, your sense of self, financially, in order to protect yourself, potentially being thrown in court. See, Claudia said, why aren't false allegations being handled in criminal court? And that's, yeah, exactly right. That's a big problem. So one of the talk at the conference actually was by this group of people from Europe. I forgot where exactly. And I think they are public defenders, I believe. I think, or social worker, like somewhere in the middle. Like, they're not judges and they're not parents and they're not lawyers. They're somewhere in the middle. I forgot this group of 3 ladies, and I apologize, I forgot. In somewhere in Europe, and they were talking about handling false allegation, and they were talking about like, oh, someone brought up a question and said, okay, I have a situation of that country. I forgot which country it was in Europe. And this father was accused of, for molesting the children, and yet there was no fact finding. So, and then he lost his children. And then this lady said, oh, if there's allegation of child abuse, and you need to defend yourself and clear your name before you can fight for your children, etc. And in a way, it was very frustrating for me. And I actually raised my hand up. And I actually put this to them and said, first of all, many times, especially in alienation, parents are being accused with false allegation of abuse. It's the allegations are made in the family court, and yet there's no criminal court for you to clear your name. You don't have an opportunity to clear your name. This false allegation have been made in the civil court. The judge listened to it and take a bias, and yet you have no opportunity. There's no fact-finding inquiries. There's no opportunity for you to clear your name. So now you're being biased against, you're being judged against, and yet you don't have opportunity to clear your name, and that's a big problem. It's not being handled in the criminal courts, and that's the problem. Judges take bias against you. You don't have opportunity to clear your name. If you're lucky enough to be able to clear your name somehow in the family court, by presenting whatever, and there's no ramifications for the accusers, for the perpetrator of false allegation. There's no implication whatsoever. So it creates this big problem. And on top of that, there's so many things. So anyway, I was very frustrated, and I actually brought up this question. And I remember in the room, in the conference, a lot of people sitting around actually nodding their head at me and go, yes, that's exactly what's going on with us, and etc. And so this lady said, yeah, I understand. She responded to my question, and then she said, I hear that. And she said, okay, I had a case, for example. This case started in, she said, 2014. And this father was being accused of, molesting the children. And so the court, before they could have a proper inquiry to see if he did indeed molest the children, they have to deal with the custody of the child. And so to be safe, obviously they took the child away from the father. And now the father is in court fighting to clear his name against this molestation charge. And then, every time he clears his name, there will be a new allegation. This is what we see all the time. The moment you clear your name, there's going to be a new allegation, and it's relentless. So anyway, just a few months ago, the court finally go, oh, this mother is lying. These are false allegations. Finally, the court, and remember, she said this case started in 2014. So now we're nearly 10 years on. Finally, the court said, okay, this mother is creating false allegation. Okay, we're going to trust the father now. We're going to do something about it. Now, 10 years on, the child has gone through so much damage. You fought your case in court, and you may win in court, but within this child's head, is it ever going to be fixed? This child that believes that her father molested her, this false allegations have been going on in this child's head for 10 years. Will you ever get that back? Will you ever be able to resolve that, reverse that damage? And now 10 years, is this child still within the system? Because once the child turned an adult age, you could do nothing about it. And that's the problem. It's very frustrating. And I apologize. I don't like talking about these things in that way, because it seems like we give our power away, and I don't like to stay in that helplessness kind of position. I think it's always important for us to recognize the problem, but figure out how to fight against this. But definitely, I do want to acknowledge it's very frustrating. There has to be a better way of fixing this, and that's why this is such a big thing for me, is how do we figure out a way of dealing with false allegations? Because yes, we need to protect victims of abuse, but we also need to recognize there's a lot of false allegation of abuse. How do we identify between true victim and the perpetrator of false allegation is so important. So anyway, there's that. I think there's a lot of different other talk at the conference that I thought was very important. I don't think I have more notes for now, but I wanted to share that with you guys. Actually, there's a talk by Dr. Jennifer Harman about misinformation and ideology, how misinformation and gender bias ideologies are being used to influence society and legislation and denying science. And all of this are really unfortunate situation that victims are in. And I think the study was important for us to recognize how gender biased ideology and misinformation are being used so that we can figure out a way of fighting it, because you can't fight something if you don't understand it. So that was also a very important study. I believe that ICSP, they stream the conference content live publicly, but they also, I believe that, I don't know where, but I think you can access these videos. So when I find out the information of where, I will let you guys know, but I think that it is public somewhere. So just look out for that. I see comment about the court bends over backward to deny the abuse of false allegation. And that's part of that ideology, right? Gender-based ideology, where, the moment a female claim that a male has perpetrated abuse toward her, the courts tend to listen to that very quickly. Not just the court, the police, much easier. The police and the court and the sheriff and people around are much quicker to believe when a woman said, "Oh, I have been abused by this man," versus when a man say, "I have been abused." In fact, I even know situation where male victims of abuse go to, for example, shelter, for victims of domestic violence, and was turned away because he's a male, right? That kind of situation I've seen many times. So there's this gender bias situation that create a problem for us. And then on top of that, there's this, good intent of, oh, let's make sure we protect the victims. So let's listen the moment someone claims that there's an abuse. The problem is if we listen uncritically, if we just believe everything someone say without critically examine that, we are going to go to the other side where we will essentially promote false allegation and empower the perpetrator of abuse to create even bigger abuse than what it should be. Okay, and then Burnett said, good point, Petra. A father may get some justice when fortunate enough to prove the false allegation, but getting his child back is a whole new matter. It's a terrible situation, for sure. So anyway, today is Mother's Day, and I know it's a very, very tough day for many parents, and I do understand this. So I wanted to remind you that you are enough, that you are a mother, no matter what, and no one can take that away from you. I also wanted to remind you about unconditional love. Unconditional love means that you love your children no matter how your children act. So when your children are lost, like they are right now, if they are alienated, they are lost, they are victims of abuse, they may not behave in the way that they should be lovingly to you. Don't let that affect how you feel about the love you have for your children. So please stay in the power, holding on to the hope. Know that your love is incredible. No one can take that away from you, and stay in that power. Thank you so much for being here. If you guys could please help me share this talk and letting more people know about it. If you could like the video, I would really appreciate it. I will come back. I do have a few different, actually at the conference, I also met and talked to an adult child of parental alienation who had a very interesting story that I wanted to share. So I will interview that person in the future date. I'll come back with that. So Alicia said the problem is psychologists are ordered to test for personality disorders, which have been well established since the 50s. With a review of text, email, videos can easily identify a personality disorder parent. Sometimes both parents have a personality disorder, but a clear diagnosis is important for make child-centered decision. Sometimes personality disorders are ordered in custody battles, but not always the case. I definitely agree. And if we could have clear diagnosis of personality disorder, it definitely would be helpful. I do agree with that. Unfortunately, we have a system right now where it's so prohibitively expensive, and there's a lack of qualified professionals to do what is needed to be done. Unfortunately, that's how I feel. That this is why we have problems just keep going on and on. Okay, we have that. What was the other thing I was gonna say before I go? Um, I lost track of that now, but that's okay. Oh, there's a comment that I thought was kind of interesting that came from the conference. One of the talk was that we don't have any review of the court system, right? There's no measure. There's no review, as in like, before you go to a restaurant, you look at Yelp review, you look at Google reviews, and you get to choose, right? You go, oh, this restaurant had better star rating. I'd rather go to that. I don't want to go to the other one. We also don't have any follow up. Like when a court make a decision about custody, there's no review of that in a year time to see if that decision was correct. There's no follow up to see in 6 months time if this child is actually safe, if that decision was correct. There's no accountability. There's no review. There's no anything. So there's no opportunities for the system to improve. So we as a system is treating the safety and the well-being of our children worse than making decision of where to fix our watch or where to go for dinner. And that's a very big problem. And when it comes to a custody situation, parents don't get a choice of where to go, and they are demanded to give up their rights, because whatever the court decision is, they have to go with that. They are demanded, their right was stripped off, and they have to listen to whatever that decision is, as opposed to you turning up to a restaurant and you go, oh, this restaurant doesn't look as good as I thought, I'm going to leave. You don't have that choice. And so as a system, that's a very big problem. And I thought that was a very interesting analysis, or a very interesting way of looking at it. I wanted to think more about all these notes that I have, because obviously all of these are still questions in my head as to how do we solve this problem as a community. And definitely for you as parents, it's out of everything. The biggest thing is definitely hold on to your hope and don't give up the fight. Anyway, you have a wonderful day. A lot of love to you, all the mothers out there. A lot of love to you, all the fathers out there who stood by regardless of the situations. So be strong, and I will see you guys again soon. Thank you so much.